policy and overview and scrutiny panel. If I can have a bit of quiet at in the cheap seats over there. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence? Well, I think we've had apologies for absence from the light. I think we should record the light's apologies, and I apologise to those of you who are sitting in the dark. Some of you will be used to that, I suspect, but I'm not going to sort of stray any further into that particular issue. Item 2 is declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any? Do it very well. Item 3 are the minutes of the previous meeting. Are they approved? Okay. Just one thing to mention, or two things to mention. Firstly, we did invite Atos to return, and they have refused. And I think we have to do what we did previously, because they had, on a previous occasion, refused to attend, and so we got members of Parliament to ask questions of the Minister, and it was remarkable how quickly they changed their mind on that one. So we'll see if that will succeed. And the other thing is that we were talking about the assessment centre in Croydon and the lack of parking nearby. We understand that an application has been made and it's been called in by a local member, and we are proposing to have a conversation with somebody that I meet up through the joint overview and scrutiny and health to see if we can assist there, because the previous premises were so unsuitable. I think we got a report on that, and we all concluded that something needed to be done. So if we can encourage our colleagues in Croydon to provide more blue badge marking, or to grant this planning permission, then I think that's got to be worth our while trying. So just to update you on that. It was DWP that was supposed to be coming, not Atos. Sorry, I tend to mix the two of them up. Atos have been, DWP have also attended occasionally, so it's Atos that are dealing with the PIT assessment centre in Croydon, and it's the DWP that we wanted to come and discuss the whole idea of a pop-up service. Okay. Item 4 is improving access to psychological therapies and primary mental health care services developments 2017 to 2020. Who's presenting that?
I am.
Josh.
Hi.
The floor is yours. Do you have a presentation, or?
It should be in your packs. Yes,
I'll put it on screen as well.
I think people have got it in front of them.
We've all got it, so...
Perfect. Okay. So, good evening. Thank you for inviting me. First of all, an apology. My commissioner for this service, Patrice Beverley, was going to attend, but his son is unwell, and so he's had to send his apologies. You've got me. I'll do my best to cover it. If there's any questions I can't answer, I can send you a response afterwards in minutes. So I've been asked to come and talk about our psychological therapy service in Merton in the context of some challenges, both local and national, around people receiving the service in a timely manner. I'll start with what improving access to psychological therapies is. So it's a national policy to improve the provision of services for mild to moderate mental health problems, recognising the significant prevalence in society as a whole, that seems to be increasing, but until recently services have not kept up to meet that demand. So the improving access to psychological therapy service policy was to do just that. And I will talk about some of the challenges we've had in Merton, but also about our new service that will go live on the 1st of April. The other thing I'd just say in terms of context is the targets around this are very, very challenging. So the national policy says that this year, of all of the people who may have a mild to moderate mental health problem such as anxiety or depression, 1 in 5 of those are supposed to receive treatment every year. That will increase to 1 in 4 over the next couple of years. That represents a significant increase from historical standards, and when you look at international comparisons, this is the biggest rollout of psychological therapies in the world. Now, all that probably says is that worldwide comparisons aren't that great either, but the scale of what the NHS is trying to achieve is significant. So in terms of some of the challenges we've had in Merton, so this was addressed this year, but over the last couple of years the Merton service hasn't received the additional investment it really required to increase its access. We did address that in 1819, so the amount of activity we commissioned from the local provider, which is Think Action, provided by Ad Action, would have allowed us to hit the targets had a number of people entered treatment. However, the access rate for services has been really challenging in Merton, and I'll show you a graph in a minute that shows how that's been under standard for some time. However, waiting times once you get, if you do seek the service, are very good, and part of that is a symptom of not enough people accessing the service. But most people will engage a therapist within 6 weeks of the referral. Many people will see a therapist within a couple of weeks of that referral, depending on which mode you use. We've also had some variation in what's called the recovery rate. So the policy says that of the people who access the service, half of those people should recover. And recovery is based upon the improvement across a number of different scores, depending on the condition that you've been referred or self-referred in for, generalised anxiety score, things like that. And we have had some underrepresentation from certain groups which we're seeking to address. So slide number 4 shows just on a graph the challenge we've had. So the blue line is the number of people who need to enter treatment every week in order for us to achieve our target. As you can see, the red line has been consistently below that. This takes us from April 15 to March 18, so over a 3-year period. So what have we done about that? So we've had a 2-part response. Part of that has been just increasing the funding. So that's what we did this year, to make sure that we were commissioning enough activity so that if people did require the service, the capacity would be there to see them. The second part is we worked with the current provider, Think Action, and agreed that we would engage 2 other providers to come in and add additional capacity and routes of treatment. So IESO and Big White Wall are digital providers of psychological therapies, as they provide a purely online service. They are established providers, and it means that people who may not have been able to attend a face-to-face service will be able to use these services instead. We've also done some significant work with the current provider. That's been to the extent of we've had 2 of our directors spending a day a week at times with the current provider to work through some of their operational issues to make sure that people are getting in and seen quickly. We've also had support from the NHS England team that looks at mental health coming in to support operations as well. Many of you, particularly if you live in the borough, will have seen we've done a lot of work on promoting the service as well. So there's been a lot of leaflet drops from the various providers. There's adverts on bus stops. If you're on Facebook, you'll get targeted adverts via that route. And we're also been reviewing our GP engagement, so all of the new providers have been spending a lot of time with our GPs. Having said that, one of the things that I'm keen for people to understand is that this isn't like a classical NHS service. You can self-refer, and actually the majority of people who access this service self-refer. So people don't need to go and see their GP to talk about their mental health ahead of accessing the service. They can just go do that straight away. And we have been devising a new service model which will go live from April, which I'll cover in a minute. So in terms of the impact some of that work's had, so slide number 6 shows the improvements in people entering treatment. What you can see there is a nice upward trend that meant that we were achieving our access targets for psychological therapies from the summer. We had a dip in December because of Christmas, but what I can report, because we receive the data on a weekly basis, is that apart from the Christmas week and the following week, first week of the new year, the numbers are back up, and we're seeing the amount of access that we need in order to meet our targets, which is really positive. We are continuing the communication and engagement materials throughout the rest of this year in order to maintain our performance. So that's the sort of what has been and what's happening now, and I just wanted to give the committee some idea of what's coming. So we have recently completed some commissioning of a new service, which we're a primary mental health care service, which is a 3-step model It's being commissioned from South West London and St George's Mental Health Trust, which I think is a really positive move because it means we now have a vertically integrated mental health provision within Merton, which I think will be very helpful for reasons I'll come to. And that's made up of 3 elements. The first element is about mental well-being. So this builds on some of the work we've been doing more broadly in the system around well-being, social prescribing, the East Merton model of care, and so on and so forth. So this is a service that will be for anyone who self-identifies that they have support needs, and it's linking people up with certain community assets, well-being services, voluntary sector groups to help them with some of those issues. There'll then be a psychological therapy service, which, as well as being expanded to allow for improvements in access, will also have particular pathways that support people with long-term conditions. And then finally, a primary care recovery service for people with more severe mental health needs. That will, on one hand, facilitate discharge from secondary care, but also allow a step-up pathway for people whose needs are slightly beyond what psychological therapies will be able to provide them. And then the last slide on slide 8 is it's a very high-level summary of what I've just said, except just to make the point that because we now have this service provided by South West London and St George's Mental Health Trust, it means that we can also get a seamless step up into secondary mental health care services if that's required for some people. And similarly, there's a community offer for those being stepped out of secondary care mental health services probably sooner than we would otherwise be able to achieve. So I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions anyone may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
You mentioned you were working on the people from Black and Asian minority ethnic group. Why is that a hard to reach group for you, and how are you tackling that?
So one of the things we know from the national evidence is that there are certain issues around the stigma of mental health conditions that can be more prevalent within certain BAME groups. And we also know it's a problem with men as well. So those are the 2 main underrepresented groups. What we're seeking to do about that, so we've been targeting our engagement materials via certain community groups that cater for those people. We've also asked the new service to focus its mobilisation in areas where that might be more of an issue, so for example in East Merton. So we're going to make sure the new service is accessible from as many areas as possible that map some of those needs.
Thank you very much for this, and it's good to see the efforts you're making. One of the things I'm concerned about is I can't see any reference to carers, people with mental health issues, because I think they need support, and if they don't get the support and pushed to the limit, then I think it's worse for those people with the mental health issue. So what are you going to do for that group?
So we have a system of attempting to identify carers within general practice, and when that happens, there's an assessment of their needs, and if there's a belief that the service will be useful, we'll be encouraging people to access these services for them. One of the areas that we've asked the service to work on, apart from the 3 main long-term condition areas of diabetes, cardiovascular disease and COPD, is to develop services around pathways into this service for carers, along with people who are suffering with cancer or recovering from cancer, and also older people. The reason that I haven't flagged those services is those are going to be developments within the first year of the contract. We focused on the major long-term condition areas because there's a significant amount of evidence that if you support people's mental health, then their management of their condition will significantly improve. And it is something that we're looking at in the first year.
Thank you, Chair. It's really great to see the improvement in access to IEP services, but I think you mentioned a couple of times really challenging national targets, so I just wondered whether there would actually be sufficient service provision for those who needed to access service, because obviously you're doing all of this sort of marketing and publicity drive, so will the provision match up to that?
So one of the ways that we achieve that is through this integration with the long-term conditions pathways. So these are patients that we're aware of in the system already and that are being seen by GPs, community health services, others on a regular basis, and therefore will be more proactively offered this service going forward. So that's where a big chunk of those additional people come from. There is a challenge nationally that moving from a 20% access rate, we're just under 20% access rate at the moment, so a fifth of the eligible caseload to a quarter, is going to have a significant challenge around workforce. But again, I think this is one of the real benefits of having South West London and St George's providing this service. They have a significant amount of scale. With this contract, they'll be the provider of IAP services for Sutton, Merton and Wandsworth. And given their educational links, academic links with other organisations across the whole of South London, we think they're going to be a more resilient provider than we've had so far.
On that, so you mentioned that a significant portion are already in the system, so they're just not being able to access the care at present.
They're not accessing the care. They could, but we haven't had a very clear pathway. So if you are diagnosed with COPD in general practice at the moment, you're not automatically offered this as being something that might help you. Now, some people are doing that already because that's part of their clinical knowledge, and they will offer that to people if they are showing signs of mental distress or mental illness of some description, but it will become a formal part of the pathway going forward.
Which is the final note, so this is almost like a social prescribing drive to prevent the onset of complications, rather than necessarily focus directly at mental health.
So the well-being aspect of the service is more akin to a social prescribing offer, but the targets are based on the psychological therapies, which is the second step in the model. But people will be proactively offered that support. Sometimes that can be a bit more subtle. The classic example is if you have COPD and you experience exacerbations, a lot of your outcome is going to be based upon how you prepare for those exacerbations and deal with the stress and anxiety when they happen. There's a lot of evidence that through CBT in group therapy, it can really help people manage their condition in those exacerbations and reduce the amount of times they have to go to hospital.
John?
Okay, just coming back to the referral rates. Okay, are we saying that referral is it through the GP or through a personal referral or hospital to the mental health unit? So can you just explain that a little bit more in detail so I can get a full understanding of what you're talking about?
Yes, certainly. So you can be referred directly by your GP, or you can self-refer. Often people self-refer after they've had advice from their GP or another medical professional. The opportunity with the new service model is awareness of these services can be spread much broader than just clinical services. So with the new providers, for example, we've been talking to colleagues in the local authority, for example, so that social workers might want to suggest this as being something that might be useful for some of their clients. There's also a big push for all of our staff in the public sector. If you combine us all with the biggest employer, it needs to be part of people's offer to their employees for support as well. But the main routes are referral via GP or self-referral.
Yes, thank you. I don't want to take too much time, but I've got a number of different points, so you might want to take notes before coming back. Just running through the report. On the performance, the access rate is poor and waiting times are very good. Surely the second is the function of the first. When access rates go higher, our waiting times are going to go up, likely, unless 1.1 additional investment without putting a number, an amount of cash figure on it, a percentage figure. Is these significant or just keeping up with 4 or 5% cost of increase in staff salaries, or is it a significant bigger upgrade than that? The one thing I wanted to talk about mostly was about referrals from GP and self-referrals, as Joan was mentioning. And it is linked in with getting those referral numbers up and access numbers up, because we know that mental health issues are very often linked with long-term health conditions. You mentioned COPD, diabetes is another one, chronic arthritis, and lack of reducing mobility in older age is another significant factor in driving mental health issues. So are our GPs or other health services treating people with those conditions routinely saying, not waiting for people to come forward and saying, I think I have a mental health issue, but routinely asking people, do you think this would help you, proactively, rather than waiting for people to either self-refer or things get so serious that they need to be referred. And I have, just from people I know and the knowledge of the community, there are, and the national figures we see, there are a large number of people who don't access these kind of services but are on long-term on low-level antidepressants and are managing. And those, anyone on prescription for antidepressants that needs to be renewed you can't just keep going to the chemist for a renewal. Every 6 months or every year you have to go to your doctor. And if your GP has a patient who may not have presented with anything else and may not be having a problem but has been on antidepressants for 2 years and has not come off them and just keeps going back for repeat, they should be almost an automatic referral to your service, because obviously we would hope a lot of the time you go on antidepressants, it's a couple of years, whatever has happened, you recover. And it links in with the numbers we've got on recovery, which are very low as well. People aren't recovering. We may be stabilising people and keeping them with low-level mental health over the long term, but we're not curing, we're not getting full recovery. And finally, I think on the 3 bullet points on page 7 about the people you're aiming at. People with long-term conditions I've covered, older adults I think I've covered a bit. Men, I believe that the highest cause of death amongst men under 40 is either suicide or car accident. But I think suicide overtook car accident quite recently and is now the highest cause of death amongst men under 40. So not just men, but men under 40, and that needs to be a specific target for the service to, not just keeping people on low-level mental health, but actually preventing deaths. I think I had some other things, but no, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Apologies if I miss one. So the first one was around the access rate versus the waiting times, and it's because the other's not been great. So that is part of the reason going forward. But to link to your second point around the increase in funding, so this is almost a doubling in funding for psychological therapies in Merton from April. That is partly to address some of the funding levels in the past. It's also to address the increase in access we need to see. So we are commissioning easily enough capacity to meet the demand within good standards of waiting times in the new service. And we have some assurance because the South West and St George's have achieved that in Sutton and in Wandsworth consistently as well. So I have some assurance around that. In terms of links with primary care, so I think it's linked to the point I was trying to make before, so if I wasn't being clear. At the moment, it's not a proactive offer by all GPs for people with those conditions, but that is the idea going forward. And in order to enable that, this service will be much better embedded with local GPs in Merton. At the moment, it is provided at the practices, but they're not necessarily always considered part of that practice team, and this is trying to embed that working much more. In terms of the links to people with antidepressants, so I'm not clinical, so I don't think I'd be able to say that someone in the position that you're talking about should be automatically referred. Part of the access target is reflecting that psychological therapies aren't for everybody. Some people may find that medication is or a combination of medications and therapies is what they need. However, because of the point I made before around a greater integration with primary care, I'd be hopeful that if a GP had someone in the position that you're describing, they would feel able either to suggest that that patient is referred or refers themselves into this service, or is actually able to talk to one of their colleagues in South West London and St George's about that case and whether or not that might be the right thing to do. Finally, around men under 40, so yeah, you're absolutely right. I think suicide is the biggest killer of men under 40. The good thing about this service is often some of the mental health issues that can lead to suicide manifest themselves quite a long time previously in a more minor issue. Having accessible services to address those should help with that, but it's one of the underrepresented groups is working age men, so absolutely we'll be looking at that. And there's a suicide prevention strategy that I think has been here recently, looking at Dagmar is about to come recently, that will reflect the fact that we're bolstering this area of mental health provision.
Stephen is about to ask us a question that we couldn't see coming because we can't see him. John very kindly fulfilled that part of his job description that says on as such we necessary and try to get the lights sorted out, but we're moving for reliable forward and they can't be fixed tonight. So I apologise to you two in particular, but please do ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John, for trying to get the lines fixed. I was looking at the target and seeing that it's a flat line, and from general reading, I've always assumed that seasonal affective disorder impacted people with anxiety and mild mental health. So I was just wondering what was being done in order to meet peaks in demand that might occur during the winter months.
So the target is based on a very strict proportion of the population, which is why it's a flat line. But you're right to say that the service will experience peaks and troughs. So an example of that is a few weeks ago, it was what's known in the media anyways, Blue Monday. So apparently the most unhappy time of the year, which I think is the first Monday after the seasonal period, where you have a spike in relationship breakup, mental health, people presenting with mental health issues. So we did a lot of engagement around that time, knowing that it's likely there would be a spike in demand around that time. So services are well aware of that. South West London and St George's have a huge amount of experience, and so in their workforce planning, they take that into account. I'm not sure of the direct link between this and it being dark and some of the impacts that might have on mood. But that's something I can clarify and send a report back to the group on.
Thank you. Just want to ask, are there any work put into schools and colleges to support educate teachers how to look at signs when, because as we may know, we have quite a lot of young people nowadays who are going through mental health issues. Some of them are either mental health issues until something happens, trigger, and then it becomes very, outward. Are there any support put in for, teachers and, schools at an early stage, so therefore it can be identified?
Yes, so this service that I'm talking about is for adults, but we do lots of work on children's mental health. So the local transformation plan covers a lot of that, which I can send to the group for their reading. It's published on our website. The one bit I'll particularly pick out is we've recently, alongside Wandsworth and Sutton, received some national funding to pilot the development of mental health support teams in schools, which provide a dual role. One part of that role is support for students within the school and their mental health and wellbeing and resilience, but the other is around support to the wider educational and support team in those schools. So that's part of a national pilot. I think that's going to inform a much wider rollout. We have one mental health support team per borough for the pilot over the next couple of years, but I'd be amazed if that didn't result in a much wider rollout over the next few years.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to come in on the seasonal aspect of it, and darker nights and lighter nights in the summer, etc. The evidence I've seen is that there are virtually no people who are perfectly well in the summer and then become ill in the winter and then are perfectly well again the next summer. What is more likely to happen is people with existing conditions get slightly worse during the winter, but you don't have people who are well in the summer and ill in the winter. Conversely, and counterintuitively, there seems to be some evidence of people being more ill in the summer because the general societal sort of people are going on holidays, people are having fun, and if you're not, you don't feel it as much in the winter when everyone else is being a bit down. In the summer, when everyone else is up and having fun and you're still down, you feel it more. So the actual peaks and troughs you might get in the service is not worse in the winter, better in the summer. It is pretty much a flat line, and because everybody's condition is different and unique, and there isn't really, as you might expect, and I understand why people expect it, but there isn't really a peak and trough across the year. It is pretty much flat across the year.
Okay. Are there any more questions? Well, I've just got one myself, and that is when you talk about the access rate, it would be interesting, you say that we're through the national targets, but how do we compare with neighbouring boroughs? You mentioned Sutton and they seem to be doing better, but what about others nearby? Croydon, Lambeth, Kingston?
Would you right to say Sutton? So Sutton have implemented a very similar model to this in the last couple of years and are owing a lot of their achievement to that. Wandsworth have been just about on target for the majority of the last couple of years, but there have been some peaks and troughs in that, and some of the challenges they've seen are the same ones that we've seen. Croydon have had similar challenges to Merton, with a mix of levels of funding, the efficacy of the current provision, the engagement with primary care, the engagement with certain communities, and they've sought to address it in a similar way. So they've been running a similar procurement that will launch at a similar time. I don't know off the top of my head around Lambeth, but I do know, so the initial invitation to this meeting came after a BBC News report that said that I think it was around half of places across England were struggling to meet this target, so that gives you some idea of the general challenge there's been in addressing this issue.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Colleagues, son, did you say is ill?
Yes.
Better soon.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.
Item 5 is health and wellbeing strategy.
Shall I fire ahead? Thank you very much. So the purpose for me to come here to you tonight is to just update you on the progress with our refresh of the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy. You will be aware that the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy is a statutory duty of the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I want to share with you a little bit around our process and our thinking about what to prioritise in this strategy. And I would like you, obviously, always open to contribute to ideas, but then also at the end of the paper you'll find some links to surveys, and Stella, it would be great if you could update them because we have got them all now. If you have contact with your constituencies, try to spread the survey as far as possible so that we can gather as many insights and ideas. That's just the plea. So the way we've thought about the Health and Wellbeing Board and the strategy is that we really try to think as a board, how can we most add value? And we don't start from a blank sheet of paper because we've got a bit of a tradition, and I'm quite sort of proud of our ethos around focusing on fairness, inequalities, our emphasis on prevention and early action rather than waiting until things go really problematic, a very big commitment that we are actually covering children and adults, and so jointly with Rachel and cabinet colleagues to push the idea of think family, so wherever there's an adult we think about children, really with children we think about adults. And then very close to our heart as a board is that we think we don't have all the solutions and we have to work with the community we serve rather than thinking we know best and cough up priorities. So we have a track record of really working and engaging. I also have to mention, and Josh has now left, that health and well-being is obviously big, and we are absolutely including emotional and mental well-being as well as physical well-being. And what we've in a way done is divvied up the task a little bit and say, where is the biggest levers for the health and well-being board, and we concentrate on what we call healthy place. So how can we, amongst all our members and jointly, use all our levers to create the conditions in which people can flourish, and together with our NHS and our social care colleagues, we have a local health and care plan where we then concentrate much more on what are the services that we need. And jointly, between having the right services as well as the right conditions, we hope to be best placed to improve health and well-being. And just because we heard the whole thing around mental health, I can use that as an example. So everybody says we have to improve emotional and mental well-being. It's in the press, if you ask people out in the community, it is the same in Merton as everywhere else. So what do we need? So working with our health and care colleagues, and it is quite important that in the design of that new mental health service, my colleagues and social care colleagues have absolutely been involved. So there is a new service. Yeah? And if you think you are at risk or you are suffering, you can access this service. But then I think sometimes and hear the sheer number of people who we now think we have to shepherd through a service because their health and well-being isn't there. Then I start to think, what type of society have we created? Because that's not the norm. And so the idea of the health and well-being board is going a little bit back and saying, well, what is it in the place in Merton that makes us feel in the first place? What is it? Or rather tipping it round, because we want to look for something positive we can do, what is it that is in our gift that we can to create a healthy place? And in fact, I've just come back, and so has Toby, from a big workshop with loads of stakeholders, including our colleagues on environment and regeneration, to start to think, how do we design this? And there are some principles. For example, it is how do we connect people? Because even in times where everybody sits on their machines and we think 24 hours we are connected, loneliness is a huge issue. So if you ask why are they all anxious, why are they depressed? Loads are lonely. So what can we do to connect people? And the urban design is one thing. So if you create spaces that bring people together, if you even create the transport that brings people together, if you think about older people, then transport can be a big barrier. So that gives you one example how the health and well-being strategy starts to think, what are the conditions that mental health can flourish, and then health and care provides the services in conjunction. Another really important point that Josh mentioned in the little bit is we want people to work, and work is generally always said to be good for your health, and that is true, but also there's the tips. If you ask where anxiety and stress comes from, it is often your line manager. Yeah, that is just one of the elements. So going out and working. So working with workplaces to start to think, how can we create healthy workplaces? we are a big employer, as Josh said. So, for example, training people up on every floor, that we have people who are trained in mental health first aid, where you can, go and actually discuss issues. Carers are mentioned often. Looking after carers is absolutely fundamental in creating a healthy place. And when you think healthy workplace, a number of us care for children and more people. If the workplace doesn't consider that, it will be causing stress and anxiety. So I just picked that as an example so that you can imagine how we are creating the health and well-being board strategy as creating a healthy place within which we then have a service offer working very closely with our NHS colleagues. And we've now, linking up again with our NHS colleagues, themed our strategy Start Well, Live Well, Age Well, all in a healthy place, simply so that we can structure our thinking, but very much also understanding that there is a lot of intergenerational work to be done, rather than putting everybody in their own box. Some of the assets we have is if we would bring the older and younger people closer together. That is another theme that for the health and well-being board strategy has come out quite strong and loud. So I won't, because I'm looking at the clock, it's late already. So I wanted to share with you, it is at the moment underway, so we are still very, very open. The draft will be discussed in the Health and Wellbeing Board in March, and we are very, very keen, and I'm very thankful because the Health and Wellbeing Board members have been really proactive. So we're not just sitting in our meeting and then somebody else, an officer, writes a big strategy and then it gets signed off. So the Health and Wellbeing Board members have led these different workshops, so they own it, and then we're very keen that we are using our existing infrastructure of what we call community connectors, groups that we know, to check out and triangulate, so that what we come up in the end really reflects where we can find the most value. So we wanted to update you, any ideas keep them in, and then particularly request that you share out the survey between you.
Thank you, Pepper. Are there any questions or comments or contributions or ideas?
I want to have a question, but it may be away from this. So if I have done a course, you can email me like that. Okay, I remember 3 or 5 years ago, I had to think about sickle cell. Because every time we come to a meeting, I've never seen anyone mention about sickle cell. And the reason why, because I'm in Colorado Syndrome, which you know, of course, and we have quite a few people in Colorado suffering from sickle cell. And I mean, I just want to find out, do you know how many, for students or sickle cell carriers or in school, what are the sorts of help you for them? Where can they go perhaps with, away from the hospital, are there any call centers that they can pick the phone up when, parents get ringing and say, well, okay, where do I get some support? Like somebody to talk to is an issue of concern. Because as you may realize, it can be very deadly, it can be very tragic if someone doesn't know how to, care for it. And I just want to get some more information because people have asked me questions, I don't can answer it.
So as you see, and what I've just explained is the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy doesn't try to do disease by disease, so it has a different approach. That doesn't mean that you have an absolute legitimate question. I'm not working as a healthcare anymore, I was close to the doctor, so I haven't got the information up my sleeve, but it would be my NHS colleagues that will have that information. And I think I remember it has been raised as a scrutiny topic before, so in the new cycle we might review again whether that has enough interest among all the other topics to have a proper review of the source.
In the meantime, could we ask the NHS colleagues?
Of course. Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah, I had 2 points. One's a slightly minor point on page 6 of, or page 18 of our report. Under Live Well, the top one is diabetes, and under the vision, everything in there relates to type 2 diabetes or gestational diabetes or something. So if you could label it type 2 diabetes rather than diabetes as a whole, because none of that affects people with type 1, who are about 10% of people with diabetes. That's a minor point. But I'm very interested in the workplaces thing and how we can encourage other employees in Merton and as employers ourselves to be better workplaces. I happened to, not so long ago, work for the Forces Society, who obviously, as a women's organisation, understand care responsibilities for either older relatives or children and other things that specifically women usually more often need, but it's the same for men as well. The Forces Society standard contract of employment is for 4 days a week. You have to apply to work 5 days a week. The standard offer is for everybody is 4 days a week. What we have at the moment under the law is that contracts are 5 days a week, and you have the right to request flexible working if you want to reduce that down because you have children or elderly relatives or a mental health issue or any other reason why you only want to work 4 days a week. But you have to apply for that, and your employer can turn it down. If your employer turns it down and you think, I'll go and find another job, there are virtually no jobs advertised at 4 days a week. Nearly every job you see is either part-time, 2 days a week, 2.5, or full-time, 5 days a week. And if you apply for a job and say, I'd love to do this job, but I think I could do it at 4 days a week, you don't get to interview. And that is just what happens across all sectors, public, private, every sector. We are just tunnel vision staring at all the time. People work 5 days a week, don't they? And it's got to be more than half of people now would prefer to only work 4, 3.5, or however many. If you have 10 full-time equivalent people in the department, that could be 15 people doing 4-day weeks, not 10 people all doing a 5-day week. I think that is one of the main things. If we could change it within our employment practices in the council, brilliant. If we could encourage other employers across Merton to change that, even better. I've now switched my mic on.
So I think in flexibility in the working pattern, be it a number of days, be it the shape. I've got happen to have the luxury in a way that in the way my work requires, I can allow quite a lot of flexibility. It's a knowledge business that's very different to some of the frontline services because it obviously needs to correspond. But I've all sorts of condensed working hours, long working hours, 4 days, 3 days. So I think it's a very challenge. And the first step is to open up discussion, and that is what we are doing in the council. We've got a workforce board where creating a healthy workplace is a top topic. So I think sharing ideas and learning, there's obviously a balancing act to be done to see what are the requirements of the job. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes we have got stereotypes which increases productivity that when we check out the evidence, they don't.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Under the Live Well, what could I different language from Dave? Linking to what you say and what Josh presented, I feel that issues such as the universal credit system and housing, because I did go and walk my dog to the next house, and very grateful. I don't have to live there, and I don't get any charge to live there, because there's no green space at all, nowhere for children to play. And I wonder how much, if we want people to live well, I think those are two issues that cause massive impact on a significant number of people. And I don't know how it would be possible for this strategy to link forward, Because if you've got no money and you've got to wait a significant number of weeks for money, and you've got no family who can sub you out, you know, what do we do? And equally, some accommodation people have to live, especially when there are some very decent properties that are currently empty. There are some in Merton. But that is slightly different. But it worries me, the impact of those two factors on living well, and I think if you haven't got those issues in place, I don't think you can live well. So how can you approach that in some way?
So I think a very fair point. A lot of it boils down to poverty, and so I would probably stretch my optimism a little bit too far to say that the Health and Wellbeing Board is turning all that around. But for me, what is the important bit is to focus all our energy on really using the levers that members on the Health and Wellbeing Board have, and then think where's the other hand of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and then working very closely, obviously, with other partnerships. And this is very important. He has got economic development, business improvement zones, housing, landly, and has some regional vision that will create in the future. And using those levers and working and linking up with some of the other strategies that are going on as well. So obviously it's the plan, and obviously we've seen about it. There I'm telling that the Merton Partnership is working on social capital. So what we're trying to carve out for the Health and Wellbeing Board is a set of priorities where we feel we can move on now. You are absolutely right in a way, I can put it back to Toby, that we went round and said, if you had a magic wand, what would be the one thing to improve health and well-being? And it is unanimously right. I look at that.
Sorry, the mic. The mic one, yes. Hello, yes. We're going back to the healthy workplace. I was just wondering, about line manager being the source of most stress in the workplace. And I think, not picking on you, Hannah, but the fact is a lot of that line manager is usually someone who's been pushed up into a position of responsibility with inadequate training, lacking leadership skills, lacking management skills, perhaps responding to situations inappropriately, not knowing how to manage teams, and also teams not knowing how to function. I'm just wondering what scope there is for actually introducing some form of leadership and management training in these places to actually improve the way that they interact and function.
I think it's completely spot on. And so from alleviating poverty, yes, but what we can start to do tomorrow is training and leadership in particular, but also more down-to-earth management training, managing time pressures, and to do that constructively throughout the organisation. We look at all our policies as well, how we actually reward and what type of culture we're creating as an organisation, as an employer. So I think there is plenty of scope, and there's also already a lot of good practice that we follow.
Thank you. I think it's great that healthy place is the focus of the strategy. I think given the massive evidence base that there is around why it's attendance health, I just wondered how much of a restriction you think it is around sort of national policy in licensing and planning in terms of achieving sort of the ambitions that are set out, how much we can do with sort of what's in place.
So again, I think working
much more closely with the Director of Environment and Government Lead for Environment opens our eyes that there are still quite a number of fields that we haven't completely studied. And for me, it is grasping those opportunities and just to give you an example, although I don't even know like it or not, but the attempt doing to really think what can we do about car use, because car use, all in all, it helps a lot of the people who can't get around, like, my God, it is also a real problem. Be it air pollution, be it sedentary behaviour, be it safety on the roads, kids can't play. So trying to think of a creative place where we're not reliant so much on the car. And obviously the parking approach is one approach. And I, in my career, have not worked before with parking professionals. I'm now really rubbing shoulders. And this is the type of connections that I think we have got a lot of opportunity. And we were reflecting just this afternoon how at the moment the air quality discussion is, we're reverting very quickly to very punitive approaches. And whether there are other positive ways of getting the use of our spaces much more universal, because a lot of our spaces are used in partial time. So kids playing at car parks when they're not cars, and opening up schools after hours, so that we are having the sort of the restriction, but really, really balanced now with and any ideas, because once you start to think and look and discuss it with your constituencies, people are full of ideas, and that's what we want to encourage.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy, and I'm very grateful to the both directors and the assistant director today. We were, Chairman, what we were worried about is the loneliness killing. In my community, loneliness is so much in older people that it's innumerable to find out how much it is. And that's the reason why a few years back we started working with the older people to bring them up. Both the director and the assistant director have been very grateful to come to our place and see what it is. But my fear is that if it is not done properly, if these organizations disappear, one is already disappeared, that's the minority organization, and once they disappear, you will not have any more work for them none. And Asians especially will not be able to get together again and do some work. So I'm very grateful at the moment to request you, Chairman, to please ensure that whatever our director and deputy director have started on, it will be helping us in helping the old people. They are people above 50, 60, 70, 80 years old. They are coming for exercise, they are coming for food, otherwise they have got nothing to talk all of their week. They come anybody want to see you, come and see them, they yap and yap and yap and yap all the time sitting there. Because they were pent up all the week. So my request is please, loneliness does kill, and please help us out. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just back to what Douglas says about spaces. A matter of fact, it was today I was at the gym and I was talking to some of our members, and the Cannon Gym. I've been going there for over 28 years. And we're talking about outdoor spaces for young people, especially something like a track. And the only one we have, well, we don't have it really, is in Tooting. They have like a track and field that people can run about. And when you look at Mitcham, we have so many spaces. They can, and the spaces just say, come and take me. I mean, that's something we need possibly to look at. Outdoor, that, people can use it whenever they feel like. And it's not very, I don't think it's very hard to come about. So that may be something that we need to look at, all of us collectively.
Yeah, so again, Chris Lee would be the one, and you might want to bring me here, because the Cannon might be aware of the lottery grant, and there's a big regeneration going on, which is absolutely trying to bring people together and encourage activity, social connection, it is, I think, a really exciting development in Mitcham. But you will also be glad to hear that we have designed with our colleagues again in the London Regeneration called the Merton Mile. It's a fixed marsh, so it will be all labelled and track which will be launching in April, where school kids can walk, older people can walk, run, have fun, simply to open up and make the best use symbolically out of our green spaces. And again, I encourage community ideas like that to come forward and in this see what can actually be delivered.
I have to say that I'm glad you mentioned the fact that you don't need a track to be able to run somewhere. And you know, on my running days, I think are behind me, but I do walk Mitcham Common every morning at 6:30. If anyone would like to join me and Hector, my Dalmatian, then you're very welcome. Any more questions? I say your enthusiasm for kind of bringing people together, and thank you for being so kind to your boss as well. I'm sure she said too. John. Oh, sorry, yes. I thought you wanted to speak on this item, but you are introducing item 6.
So, I'm here tonight to speak about some of the work the department's been doing on helping people to live as independently as possible in their own homes and keeping them out of formal institutionalised care. So, I'm not going to go through the whole paper because you've had a chance to read it. I'm going to focus on two aspects of it. One is the preventative nature of the work that we're doing, and the other is the crisis work, the reablement work that we're doing when someone goes into a crisis after a fall or a period in hospital. I'll just explain those two definitions before I start. What I mean by prevention is reducing or delaying the need for someone to come into a statutory service. So working with them earlier. Not wait until they're in crisis, but working with them earlier. That involves us changing the way that we speak to people, focusing on strengths and helping them to build those strengths rather than focusing on the issues that they have. In the reablement, what I mean by that is when someone's in a crisis, after a fall, after a period of being in hospital, the work that we do, us and our partners, to actually get them back on their feet again, to get them independent. I'll start off first with the drivers around this. There's a number of policy drivers and legislative drivers that focus the work that we do. The CARE Act is the main piece of legislation that adult social care work under. For housing, the Homeless Reduction Act 2017 and the new 10-year forward plan, which I think was in December, all focus on prevention. There are a number of other drivers that adult social care have as well, around targets, around keeping people out of formal 24-hour care. We have a target that's set for us and we have to achieve or do better than that, and targets from the Department of Health as well around delayed transfers of care, getting people out of hospital at the right time when they're ready to go and not causing a delay because of adult social care. I just wanted to come back quickly again to the CARE Act, because the CARE Act is quite important for adult social care. At one point, adult social care used to work with people that met our eligibility criteria, and that was it. So we waited for our crisis to come along, then we put lots of services in and made them more dependent. The CARE Act changed that. The CARE Act introduced a statutory duty for adult social care around prevention. And what I mean by that, and I'm going to focus on that again, it is that we work with the entire population, not just the ones that are in adult social care or in a crisis, but we work with that entire population of Merton to reduce or prevent the need for them to come into our statutory services. The other thing in the Care Act as well that's important as a change is the wellbeing principle. So we had new duties around prevention and wellbeing. I won't go through all the wellbeing, but there's 9 principles, and they really encompass the entire department, not just adult social care. So a focus on someone's physical and emotional health, their personal dignity, that they're able to maintain their domestic and family life, work and employment and voluntary work, that they're able to contribute to society, that they're in the right accommodation, in the accommodation that they want to be in. These are the wellbeing principles that are in the Care Act. So prevention and wellbeing are the 2 main things. Now, our target operating model focuses on, as a department, how we will work together and with our partners, of course, to focus on these prevention and wellbeing principles. Now, the first thing in the paper I just wanted to speak about is one of the key things is around good information and advice. Making sure that people have that information and advice to be able to make informed decisions and help them in their life. And I didn't want to start focusing on CAB and all the usual things, websites and leaflets and things. I wanted to focus on the work that we've done in our libraries. We have 7 libraries in this borough, as you know better than me. They are very vibrant, and they're not just places that people go to and get books. These are social hubs, and there's a lot of work going on in those libraries in their communities. Work from, in each of the libraries, schemes that people can go to train them and teach them how to use the internet, helping them apply for benefits, helping them apply for jobs, helping them navigate the system that we work in, increasing their IT skills. There's a new scheme in one of the libraries, a men's group, around combating loneliness for men who are one of the groups that are traditionally hard to meet. Other social groups around loneliness, around healthy eating, all happen in our libraries, and I sort of wanted to start focusing on them. I wanted then to go across the department in our housing. Our housing are working to prevent or reduce need. From funding housing-related support from the YMCA and Hestia to floating support, helping people to maintain their tenancies, to the introduction of the Homeless Reduction Act, where our housing department actively work to stop people becoming homeless. And I thought it was a useful start that Steve gave me this week, that they've prevented about 360 people, 387 actually, people in this financial year from becoming homeless. So working with them on their benefits, on their tenancies, giving them the information and advice they need to help them maintain their tenancies. And they are on their target to work with about 450 people by the end of the year. I wanted to focus on our occupational therapy teams. This is the kind of work that's done preventing, helping people to be as resilient as they can in their own communities so that they don't end up in hospital and their GPs are needing formal care. Our occupational therapies, working with our health partners, with our physiotherapists and health occupational therapists, providing aids and adaptations, loo frames so that someone is able to get off a chair, off their loo without needing support, rails and grab rails on stairs, stair lifts so that someone's able to go up and down their stairs. All of this equipment is really vital. Simple, but really vital at keeping people as independent as possible in the community. Salim, you were mentioning the voluntary sector. We've recently recommissioned our Wellbeing programme, as you know, and we've joined the Adult Social Care Wellbeing Programme with the Corporate Strategic Grants Programme to have one pot of money how we fund the voluntary sector. And alongside that, we are funding a number of the lunch clubs in the borough. There are over 20 lunch clubs. One has closed, but another one opened the week after. So one closed a couple of weeks ago, we had 20, 21 went down to 20, but another one opened just before Christmas. We've actually got 21. There's a mistake in the paper, by the way. It says 2,000 meals per week. It's actually over 2,000 meals are provided per month. It's between 500 and 700 meals are provided by these social groups, lunch clubs per week. We're funding a number of these clubs, and we're currently undertaking a comprehensive review of all of the support that of all the clubs, what they do, their criteria, how we fund them. We're currently undertaking that review just now. The next bit I wanted to come on, I mean, there is an economic value in us doing this, but it's more than that. This is the right thing to do, to work with people earlier to help prevent them coming into the statutory services, to work with people earlier, social prescribing, the work we're doing in Merton Health together, which is Dagmar's paper, working as a system, preventing people coming into the hospital, social prescribing in East Merton, all of these things are key, but it's the right thing to do as well. It's not just economically good, it's the right thing to do. I wanted then to speak about what happens then, what we do when someone's in a crisis. And what I mean by that, it's often someone has a fall, if it's an older person, an illness, a urine infection, and ends up in hospital some way. What we have here, we're very lucky, we've got a Wellbeing team, so a Wellbeing home care team. So rather than a carer going in and doing things for you, when someone's discharged from hospital, our Wellbeing team works with people to give them the confidence back, helps them, shows them how to do things, because often after a fall people are really worried, they lack confidence, they lack that, I'm scared to do it, I've got a fall. So we've got a large Wellbeing team which is very successful. About 90% of our hospital discharges go through our in-house Wellbeing team, and they link in with our community health provider around getting people physiotherapy and some other preventative services as well. But at any one time, about 50 people go into our in-house Wellbeing team, and the stats are really impressive. About 65% of the people that come out of that Wellbeing team don't need any care at the end of it. About 25% come out of the Wellbeing team and need a smaller care package than they went in. So they work with people, they build them up, they give them their confidence back, rather than just putting in lots of care and making them more dependent. The other thing I wanted to speak about as well is some of the work that we do in keeping people in their own homes. So we have approximately 30 home care providers that we commission services from for about 580 people. And we commission about 7,100 hours a week of home care to keep people at home, to keep people in their own communities, in the homes that they want to be in, close to their families, close to those local networks, rather than automatically putting people into residential care. We also have 2 extra care schemes in the borough. I think it's about 70 people in both those schemes. So people have got their own flats, their own tenancies, but there is care on site 24 hours a day. And they're another good way of keeping people out of residential care. So our numbers, our Department of Health target per year is no more than 103 people in residential. We're exceeding that at the moment, and we've got about 65 at the moment, and likely we'll have about 80 people in, new people in long-term care by the end of the financial year. That is a good thing. We're just under our target set by the Department of Health. I just wanted to touch very quickly on some of the work that public health are doing around prevention as well. Falls prevention. Public health part funds a service with the CCG to support people who have fallen or who are likely to fall. Again, utilising some of our other partners. London Fire Brigade is linked into this as well, so that when the fire brigade go out and do a fire safety check, they also assess someone's likelihood of having a fall, and if they meet that criteria, they make a referral to the falls clinic as well. Again, all preventing, getting people back on their feet. That could utilise physiotherapy, training, strength training, and a number of other things would happen in the falls clinic. Some of the other ones I thought were useful, well, they're all useful, but the other ones I thought I would highlight is the Dementia Hub. Public Health have worked with Adult Social Care to commission the dementia services in the Dementia Hub in Mitcham. It's a place where people with dementia can go for assessment, a place for families can go, carers can go for support as well, and that's proving very successful. Also dementia, Merton is a dementia-friendly borough, and it's been awarded that by the Alzheimer's Society, and that's involved training local shops, banks, and how to work and spot people with dementia and how to work with them easier, rather than be annoyed by people, which is often what happens. Annoyed, there's an older person in front of you, slightly forgetful. That work is involved training of staff and shops and local shops and communities and banks especially, I think, to actually recognise someone with dementia and have those skills to be able to speak to them. Another one is tackling isolation and loneliness. A number of people have spoken in that, and it is one of the key things that we want to look at. Again, Public Health have commissioned AIDS UK around befriending services, matching befrienders with some of our more vulnerable clients who can't get out to our day centres, who can't get out to our lunch clubs, who've got very limited access to some of the services that we have in the community. So that was one of the other ones I wanted to highlight, and I think that should be enough, and I can answer some questions now.
Thank you so much, Chair. Got tons of questions. Okay, I'm going to limit it though. I will try. Yeah. Libraries. Love that idea, but West Barnes Library is run by volunteers. They'll need training. Will you provide that? There may be some funding issues. Well, is there any money? Second question, the providers that you've commissioned, has there been a full assessment of whether they can provide the provisions that you wish? Will there be a continuous assessment and monitoring to make sure that there are no risks to the lives of these people that we are moving into independent care? How do we ensure that there won't be an additional strain to families? And I will leave it to my last question. I'm going to pick this one. The daycare centres. Are there any risks to the daycare centres? Has there been any reassessment to the way the lunch clubs are running and how that will affect communities? When will those decisions be made, and when will they be public for us to know about? Thank you.
First one, you are right. Our libraries are run by volunteers. It's 370 volunteers currently across those 7 libraries. I actually think that's an asset. I think that's a wonderful thing that the local people are working in the libraries. And yes, they have had training on the IT training and running those groups, so yes, that is in place. But I actually think that's something we should be really proud of, because often people that volunteer are actually might be lonely themselves. They might be lonely. They are getting a service from this themselves by giving something back to community. Might be a retired person, might be someone who's unemployed. That is an asset, I think, around the libraries. The second question. Sorry.
Ask the question. Will there be
additional training?
Will there be additional training? Will there be any funding? That there may be some funding issues there. There may be some need. Our volunteers are wonderful people. I love them. I work with them every day. I meet them every day. But they may have their own issues to deal with. We have to be really clear on that. We can't just expect them to get on with it.
So can I just really offer reassurance on those over 300 volunteers, and we would not expect them to carry out any activity. The volunteering role is very different from some of the activities that we would want our libraries to undertake. In relation to the specific, so I'll use an example, just might help us kind of find out our truths. So the working elementary, that was a targeted grant funded piece of money that we went off there. So we do go after a lot of the national grants for additional funding, bring that expertise into the library. We didn't want to purchase that and commission that into the libraries. The fact is, it's run in the libraries.
Okay.
So it may not be run by the volunteers, but it happens in the libraries. So just really to offer you that reassurance, I think you're absolutely right, and John's point is exact. We have an amazing group of people in Merton.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that.
But you're absolutely right. There is, you know,
I
why
know them
volunteer
personally.
for.
I know how hard they work.
Yes, yes.
You know, I don't want to give them extra stress.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Is that okay?
Do you want to respond to the other question?
Well, I'll leave the second one till last, but I'll go first to the day centres because that came here a number of months ago. So we currently have 5 day centres. 4 of them are run by the council and 1 of them we commissioned from a provider. We also have 21 lunch clubs providing about 700 meals per week. Our lunch clubs are vibrant. They're very well attended, and some of them actually have waiting lists. The one, Fish, has a social club, has a waiting list. Our day centres, and I'll speak about the 2 older people's day centres, is Woodlands and it's Eastway. Woodlands, we commission a capacity of 40, but there's only about 20 to 25 people attend the day. People don't want to go. Some people do, but more people want to go to our social lunch clubs. Our in-house day centre is called Eastway. They can have 30 to 35 a day. Again, they're running on 20%, 25% less. It's only about 20 people go a day. Those numbers as well are going down. So there's no decision made about day centres, but it's right that we look at it because we've got a very vibrant voluntary sector, and then we've got day centres that aren't being so well utilised. Does that kind of answer the question?
I don't want to turn this into a dialogue.
Don't worry, I won't go on about it. That's fine.
What's in the minutes?
That's why I limited it to 3 questions.
Now, the second question, which provider is it you're speaking about? Which provider do you mean?
Well, you've mentioned here you've got okay, 2.14. You've commissioned public health services, and then later on 2.19 service commissions, housing relating support. So those groups there. How are you assessing and monitoring them?
2.4.
You've mentioned two.
Shall I answer that? It is public health services.
Yeah.
May I? So the befriending services commissioned from Age UK, and as the word says, commissioning means that we have a service spec that we normally develop together with the providers, the market, as well as the users, because remember we have that spirit of not doing to people, but developing services with people. And then we have to go out to tender, that's the rules of the business, and choose the right provider. And then we contract manage like any other main services. The 4th service is professionally run by our community health care providers, which is, as John said, is a very high risk patient at very high risk of a fall or at a very strong impact that the falls of giving osteoporosis, for example. So they work, we have them trained trainers, some with physiotherapists or occupational therapists. So the providers are chosen and monitored like any other provider with quality assurance.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you for your talk, personally. And I will say, being a council in Powers, we have one of the most bad rates coming to services. Right. The next thing is, I just want to highlight that I was training for bereavement services, especially if someone would be avoiding care and leaving, to gain a service training and aware.
I don't know the specific, but I do know that the Wimbledon Guild offer bereavement counselling. I'm assuming they would be looking for bereavement counsellors, and I could easily get those details for you. And there will be other bereavement services, but the one I definitely know about is offered by the Wimbledon Guild, and that's across the whole council, not just in Wimbledon.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I wanted to talk a little bit about falls, at 2.5 onwards. It doesn't say it specifically here, but we know that serious falls, for instance a hip fracture, are very often fatal. We don't talk about them as fatal because they're not normally instantly fatal, but they very often knock many months, if not years, off people's life expectancy from then onwards. It says here that supporting people who have fallen or who are at risk of falls, from work I've done in the past, Alzheimer's, and not Alzheimer's, Arthritis UK, research I saw there was the biggest single risk factor for having a fall is having had a fall previously. Normally, your first fall is not that serious and doesn't injure you that badly. Unfortunately, most people do not report their first fall through any statutory service at all. Often the first fall is just like going down on one knee or bumping against the wall and getting a slight bruise, and people, because of probably pride, often don't tell people about it. And they're not going to go to their GP with a slight bruise on their arm for having just gone down onto one knee and got up again. But it is those other services that we provide or are involved with, a lunch club for older people, etc., where we need to, I think, put more effort into trying to identify where people have had their first fall, because it's normally someone's third or fourth fall that eventually means they have to go to their GP or the hospital. And identifying first falls, because of the progression and the serious nature of very serious falls, is so important. And if there's anything we can do, for example, our volunteers in the libraries to be trained to talk to people if they've got a slight bruise on the side of their face. How did you get that? Have you had a fall? And refer them then, after their first fall, not after their fifth, when it will seriously impact the longevity and quality of life for the rest of their life.
So I think spot on observations. As I said before, the service that is currently commissioned reaches a very small number of people who are at very high risk, and as we know with these risk pyramids, we would have a lot of impact if we could reach slightly lower risk, but many more numbers. So get your point. One of the approaches we are already really exploiting is the fire service, because they're very trusted and they are trained under a pilot in Merton to spot in the houses electric hazards, for example. If I highlight your idea, we are really committed to developing the libraries as community hubs, and they are already engaged. So I think it's a very good idea in terms of training. And then just linking back to our health and wellbeing board strategy, we will have seen one of the themes for age one is active aging. And so now thinking from a healthy place point of view, it's very interesting to then pay attention to pavements, to lighting, to environmental factors that also can contribute to mobility and potential falls. So pulling all those things together.
Just one little thing that I'll add to that as well, which I didn't put in the paper, was mascot telecare. There's about 1,500 people in the borough have mascot telecare, pendant alarms in case they have a fall, but also things like fall sensors. Bed sensors, if someone falls from bed or don't go back to the bed at night, that an alarm goes off back through to the call sensor. They're really vital in finding someone if they've had a fall, but also looking at those patterns linking into the GP, into the ambulance services as well.
Okay, any more questions?
Am I allowed one more?
You are.
Okay, I'll try and make this an easy one. So that there are, you said in 218, you said you want to get as many people to know about the work, what's going on in the community, engage in social activities. How will you reach the communities that are harder to reach, for example, language or cultural issues. What is your plan in terms of that?
The libraries, of course, are a space for everyone, but the lunch clubs as well, lunch and social clubs, they're over 21. They do reach all of the different client groups. So we've got Asian, Black, Caribbean. There are a number of those groups. Also faith groups as well, links into our faith groups. Dagmar, any more?
Well, one other piece of work that is happening across the council and with our health colleagues is that we're all quite desperate for a directory of services, and we are working on what we call a digital hub, but something that you, me, and the man on the street knows what is happening around us. A number of minds are trying to crack that problem because we want something that is obviously updated and known, but that is the number one priority across departments and institutions. Thank you.
Sorry?
Just to say one thing, sorry John, I'm not really having a go about you saying lunch club, but I know there's people who are very...
Mary's told me quite a lot.
Yes, and they do, and they rely on volunteers, and there is a paid sort of manager of each day, and there's another person paid, but without those volunteers, Fish and Film would not exist, and there is someone in charge to organise them, and each session seems to have about 10 people turning up. And without volunteers doing it, I think we'd be lost. And a lot of these services wouldn't be available for the various groups who need help. But equally, and it was through a community in Gravely Ward, headed by Linda Kirby, in '78, where she got so many thousands of pounds to build the North East Mitcham Community Centre, which is open morning, afternoon and evening, catering for all sorts of groups, and that just came from her leading a group of local residents to generate this thriving hub, club, resource. So I think it's vital that yes, volunteers are supported, but without them we just wouldn't have a fraction of what we've got to have. So we don't want to put them off by thinking, you know, they've got to have all this training and that, because some of them can't. Some of them go and just talk to people, they'll sit and talk to them, and that in itself is so valuable. And I have to agree with Peter, I do think one of the barriers to preventing loneliness is getting a dog, because dog walkers talk to everyone.
Chair, can I just come back to that, because I think it's a really, really important point that Councillor Kenny has raised. And there's just a couple of things that I want to try and pull together. I think it is well recognised and documented within community housing the value of the different types of activities, clubs, social clubs, lunch clubs, volunteers through libraries, that actually enable the department to undertake statutory functions within John described in his paper around the Care Act and Wellbeing and Prevention. And that's one of the key critical stages we can in saying, how do we sustain this? Because volunteers may drop off, it's not paid employment, we know the value it brings. So it seems the ideal time to actually look to formulate and say, well, what does those activities, what does those clubs need alongside those volunteers to enable them to do some of the activities that's described in John's paper. So I think it is the right time to look at that. And secondly, through the winter pressure money this year, we enabled each of those clubs, social clubs, whatever type of club activity was running, without the bureaucratic whole process around grant funding, to be able to apply for small amounts of money for additional activities throughout the winter period to enable people to be able to access. And I think Celine described some of that in relation to making sure that people were able to get to that club once a week, sometimes it's the only club that people have. So I think if anything, the discussion tonight is reinforced for me personally, that it is the right thing to do to really look at how we make sure these are sustained in the environment.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution to that. Thank you, John, for so item 70 for workplace. What we have done and what we are proposing for the coming note for us. I'd like to thank you for your attendance, your contribution, and
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.